Hi, my name is Mrs. Painter. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're using a lapel mic, so maybe this time you'll be able to hear me. And we're also going to make apricot barbecue sauce, and this is my recipe. And it's a recipe I used in Alaska when I made rosehip barbecue sauce. This is actually going to be a lot easier because you don't have a million seeds to get out of the fruit. So let's get started. Well, you might actually want to see my recipe. The first thing we're going to be putting in our sauce is our apricots. And this is an apricot puree. It's 6 cups. And if you watched my video on dehydrating apricots, I've used the same process. I blanch the apricots. I plunge them into an ice water bath with citric acid and ascorbic acid. I pitted the apricots and I took the peels off. I let them soak for a few minutes, and then I put them in my blender and pureed them. And you don't need to add any water, just scoop out the apricots, put them in the blender and puree them. Super easy. All right, so let me angle this down here so you can see my workspace. We're going to go ahead and put our apricot mixture in. And this is going to be a smaller recipe, so I'm using a smaller container. And I really love this container. It's an old Instapot insert. All right, so we have our 6 cups of our apricot puree. Now we're going to add our apple cider vinegar. That's 1.5 cups of apple cider vinegar. Let's go ahead and turn this heat on and get this started. Have it a little lower than medium. And now we're going to add a cup of onions. And I used red onions, and I chopped them up pretty fine. Depending on the consistency, when we get to the point where it's ready to be canned, I could put an immersion blender in there if I want to make it smoother. And for the rosehip recipe, it's only 2 cups, but with the apricots, a little more sugar is a good thing. So we have 2.5 cups of sugar. And again, I'm not a fan of sugar, but when it comes to barbecue sauce, there's no barbecue sauce without sugar. Give that a little stir. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add our seasoning. And I have this seasoning all out, so it'll be really easy to measure. One thing I recommend when you're doing canning projects like this, it's good to go ahead and get your apricots pureed and your seasonings out, your onions chopped, your sugar measured, your vinegar, so that when you're ready to actually do the canning, it comes together faster. So we're going to use a 1/2 tablespoon of cloves. And since this doesn't quite fit in there, I'm going to just measure over a bowl because I wouldn't want to dump a lot more cloves in there than what we're needing. All right, we have a 1/2 tablespoon of cloves. We need a 1/2 tablespoon of cinnamon, and I actually buy cinnamon by bulk, so I have it in this nice little Pampered Chef shaker container. The lid's off of it. And next we need a 1/2 tablespoon of allspice. And again, I'm going to measure it over this little bowl because I wouldn't want to accidentally dump a whole bunch of it out. I have done that before. We need a tablespoon of celery salt. A 1/2 teaspoon of pepper. That's ground black pepper. A teaspoon of cayenne. Having a little kick makes this sauce extra good. And a tablespoon of onion powder. Even though we have the cut up onions in this sauce, it's nice to have the additional onion powder in this. All right, let's give this a little stir here. So with pressure canning, you don't actually have to sterilize the jars, but you do need to wash them with soap and water. So over here you can see we already have our jars already, and I have this nice little canning funnel. It's stainless steel. It makes it easier to get the sauce into the jars so that you don't have a lot of spillage. I'm just combining the seasoning into the sauce right now. This right here is it's a splash screen, and it's actually something I got from Pampered Chef, but I had my husband put a hole in it for me. What I do if I'm making a sauce and it gets really thick and poppy, starts popping and popping out like it might burn you, I'll actually put the handle of my stirring device through this so I can stir it, but this mesh will protect you from getting burned. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and let this cook down for a little while, and we'll take a break and we'll come back as soon as it's ready to be put in the jars. Hi, so our sauce has been cooking down. It took about 20 minutes to get it to a low boil. I'm still stirring it here. You really only have to stir it every few minutes, but as it gets closer to being ready to be canned, it's going to get a little thicker and you have a little more risk of it sticking. This spatula I'm using, it's actually silicone, so it is good to about 400 degrees, and we are nowhere near 400 degrees, so we're safe with this. Let's talk a little bit about pressure canning. Every pressure canner comes with a book. This is mine. It'll tell you how much water to add to the bottom of your pressure canner. Mine takes 3 quarts. It'll tell you recipes that you can use. It'll give you suggestions on how to adjust the pressure for the altitude you're at. We are at 2,000 feet above sea level, so I'm going to be using a 15-pound rocker. We're very close here now to being able to can our sauce. So the next thing we're going to want to do while this cooks just a little bit longer is we're going to want to turn our water on for our pressure canner. Let it start warming up a little bit. I just like to bring it up to a low temperature. And this is a rack. You want to put this at the bottom of your pot because you don't want your jars right on the surface because they'll crack and break. So this recipe makes anywhere from 6 to 8 half pints of sauce. And what makes a difference is if it's really thick sauce, the volume's going to come down as the water evaporates from the sauce. If it's a thinner sauce, you're going to get more jars. So let's go ahead and turn our heat off on this. And let me turn this down so you can watch what I'm going to do now. We're ready to go ahead, and I like to just kind of scoot my pot over as close to the edge as possible so I don't spill any of the sauce on my stove. And then we'll go ahead and start loading our jars. I think that this sauce recipe would adapt to other fruits. I think that peaches would work really well, mangoes, and possibly persimmons. You might have to adjust a little bit of the seasoning, but I believe all those fruits would work really well with the sauce. Now the nice thing about this canning funnel is it's got a lip on the bottom of it, and that helps because you don't want to have your sauce go higher than the bottom of that lip, and that will help make sure that your jars seal well. Because if you have a lot of sauce on your lips of your jars are not going to seal at all. So we'll just go ahead and add the sauce to the jars now. And I'm just using a soup ladle for this purpose. It works really well. And I like to use this sauce on everything except beef. I don't really think it's good on beef. It's great on chicken, it's great on pork. It would be good on venison. Good on seafood, actually. Salmon would be fabulous. And if you're vegan, there's no animal products in this sauce recipe. You could actually put it on cauliflower. So if you like barbecue and you like cauliflower, put this on your grilled cauliflower. You can see how much easier it is using this funnel. Years ago, before I learned about these funnels, I had sauce all over the place. But it's really hard to just accurately pour into a little jar like that. So the first thing we're going to want to do once we get these jars in the pot is we're going to want to let the water heat up with the sealed lid. We won't have the rocker on it, but we'll close the lid so it's securely locked. And it has to heat up and blow steam for 10 minutes before we put the rocker on. So that'll be our first step once we put it in the pressure canner. Pressure canning seems intimidating to a lot of people, but it really isn't that hard. You just have to pay attention to little detail. And once you get started, you'll wonder why you never did it before. So to make sure that our lids stick really well, we're going to go ahead and actually use a little white vinegar on a paper towel. You could use a cloth if you want, but I'm using a paper towel. And that way we just make absolutely certain we didn't get any sauce on the edge of these jars. Because if you have any sauce at all on there, it's not going to stick, and you're going to be really disappointed after you go to all that trouble to can sauce. All right, now we're ready to put our lids on. And our bands, and I like to just kind of hold the jar or the lid in place like this with my finger when I put the band on. It seems to keep that all lined up properly. And you notice I have just a little bit of space between my jars. It makes it a lot easier to maneuver as far as putting the lids and the bands on. It's harder if you're making a bigger batch and you have more jars. You definitely want to have an old towel underneath your jars to protect your counter surface from the heat. I mean, they're not super hot right at this moment, but when we take them out of the canner, they will be very hot. Okay, the other thing that you want to use in this process is this right here. This makes it easy for you to securely lift your jar without burning yourself as you put it in and out of the pot. So I think you can see what I'm doing here. Okay, we'll just do it like this. And go ahead and turn my heat up to medium. Just about medium, I find, gets the pressure canner to the temperature I need it to be at, as well as gets it to the point where it's rocking at the correct pounds of pressure. And we're ready to put our lid on our pressure canner. This is the 15-pound rocker. We're not going to put that on until we have steam blowing for 10 minutes. All right, I like to face it so the gauge is facing outwards. Just makes it a little easier to monitor what's going on. We'll go ahead and pause the video and we'll come back when it's blowing steam. Thank you. So I forgot to mention earlier that I let that sauce cook down for about 40 minutes. If you're making a sauce and it's a little waterier, more watery than you like it to be, you can actually let that cook overnight in a slow cooker, and usually that gets it down to about perfect. The last time we made rose hip barbecue sauce, we actually did that and it turned out to have a fabulous consistency. We are almost at the 10-minute mark for blowing steam, and then we're going to be putting our 15-pound rocker on. The nice thing about this 15-pound rocker is you know without a doubt that you have the right pressure. These gauges are nice because you can kind of visually see that you're close, but if you don't have a rocker, you need to actually have your gauge calibrated every year. Let's go ahead and put this on. Part of the process that makes this work, that preserves your food, is having the correct pressure. So what we're going to do now is we need to let this come up to 15 pounds of pressure. So we'll both see that the needle will come up to the 15 mark, and then we'll also hear a loud rocking noise with that. So you can hear now that our rocker has started rocking. Our gauge has just crossed over the 15 pounds of pressure. You can see that there's a danger zone in here, so you really don't want to have too much pressure because that could be hazardous. We want to be sure to maintain the 15 pounds of pressure for the whole processing time. For this recipe, we're going to process it for 20 minutes. If for any reason you drop pressure, you have to start your timer all over again. So let's go ahead and start this timer for 20 minutes. And I'll check back with you when it's done. All right, you hear that timer going off? That means our 20 minutes are up. I'm shutting this off, and this is very important. That pressure gauge, that has to come down to at least 0 before you even think of taking that lid off. I would say just let it go for a couple hours and don't even look at it. That's what I'm gonna do. Good morning. Just back from walking my dog. As late as I got started on this project yesterday, I just let the jar sit overnight in the canner. Let's go ahead and open our lid and see how it turned out. Looks like one of our jars hasn't sealed, but let's go ahead and get our jars and get them out of the container so we can check them all out. I have the best success with the lids made by a company called Lehmann's, Lehmans. Now, these were just the lids that came with the jar, curve. There's also ball canning, ball jar lids people are familiar with. And there's another brand of lids that people aren't as familiar with. It's called Tatler. And those are a little harder to work with, but they are reusable. And I recommend everybody have some of those on hand in case we ever go through an instance of not being able to find canning supplies again. But let's turn around now and look at our jars. I want to show you what I do to test them. So every time I can, one way is you go like this. This one here, you hear that little sound? Sorry about that, I had the dishwasher on. Hear that little sound? It's highly suspicious of a jar that's not sealed. And yes, it is not sealed. So for our jars, we should be able to just take them and lift them like this by the lip of this lid, and you know they're sealed. Let's just do those all real quick. Yep. And when I take a jar out of the pantry to use, I also check them to ensure they're sealed by lifting them by the lid. And usually jars, you can pretty much guarantee they're going to stay sealed for a couple of years. The longest I've ever had a jar stay sealed with home canning techniques is 4 years, but usually 2 years is the safe time frame. And again, just want to lift it by the lip and just make sure it's actually sealed. So I hope you enjoyed my video. Thank you so much for following along with me. Please like and subscribe. I'm trying to build my channel. Thank you so very much.